There are massive implications for U.S. consumers and regional stability. There are signs that anti-American political forces are churning in Mexico in reaction. Their next presidential election's a couple years away, but boy, they could make a hard shift to sort of anti-American leftism. There are dozens of states in this country, red states and blue states, from California to Ohio, whose economies are tied to Mexican markets. These are just the states that count Mexico as their biggest or second biggest export market. That's a whole heck of a lot of U.S. territory, folks. I'm joined now by Jorge Castaneda, who was the foreign minister of Mexico, and he is now a professor at NYU. Jorge, always good to see you, sir.
Great, Chuck, to see you also.
All right, let me start with this. This 20% export tax, the argument when you talk to Paul Ryan, Speaker Paul Ryan, this really is his brainchild. It would be something that would apply to all countries, not just Mexico. Their argument is, hey, every other country does this to U.S. Exports. What kind of tax does Mexico put on U.S. exports?
We don't have a tax on U.S. exports, strictly speaking, Chuck, because of NAFTA. What we have in Mexico is a value-added tax, a VAT, like in Europe, which the United States does not have. So all imports from the U.S., stuff we import in Mexico from the U.S. are subject to a VAT tax in Mexico of 16% from the U.S. and from all over the world, by the way. So there's no discrimination against the United States. This is a function of our tax system in Mexico. It's not a tariff, and it's not linked to our foreign trade. It's almost identical to what all of the countries of the European Union and other countries in the world have.
Well, the argument that some in the Trump administration, though, as you can tell, President Trump's not yet sold on this idea. He's pondering it. But Speaker Ryan is sold on this idea. They say, hey, wait, if this is what the U.S. does across the board, that this is no less fair than what you described with a VAT. What would you say to that?
Yeah, well, he's not entirely wrong on it. The question is, one, whether this will benefit U.S. consumers, probably not, and two, what effects it will have on trade from other nations with the United States, especially if, one, you have a free trade agreement, which is the case between the United States and Mexico and Canada, by the way, and I'm not entirely clear as to whether this would be allowed or not. And secondly, whether it really does conform to WTO, World Trade Organization rules, which is not that clear either. So it's not just a domestic legislative issue in the United States. It has to do with American commitments, legal commitments, both on bilateral trade agreements and on multilateral commitments that the U.S. has made over the year, Chuck.
Tell me this. Look, we know that the current president of Mexico, he has his own popularity issues. We know he's getting a lot of pressure. There is almost unanimous opposition, I think, to President Trump in Mexico. He's not very popular in the country. Explain the political pressure that Peña Nieto is under right now.
I think there's three things we should try to remember, Chuck. One, there has never been a U.S. president who has taken office so soon, who is as well known everywhere in Mexico as Donald Trump is. You know, American presidents are not necessarily household names in Mexico until a year or two or three after they have taken office. Trump is. Secondly, he is immensely disliked in Mexico. He has a disapproval rating which is worse than Peña Nieto's, which is not easy. Peña Nieto's around 9 or 10% approval. Trump is about 3%. People really hate him here. It's really terrible. And third, you know, Mexican national sentiment against an American bully is a very easy thing to awaken. A lot of us have worked hard over the last 25 years, Chuck, to leave our Mexican resentments in the past. They were justified resentments, justified anger over what happened in the 19th century, blah, blah, blah. We put it behind us. But now, if Trump wants to really awaken this again, it's right there ready to be awakened.
And I'm going to read you something from the Wall Street Journal. I have to say, it's the first time I heard we blah, blah, blah our way through the Mexican-American War. But you're right, it's cable. We have an issue of time here. But let me read you the Wall Street Journal editorial page, which I'm sure you read. This is the moment that Mexico's left, dormant but not dead, has been waiting for as anti-American Andrés Manuel López Obrador prepares to run for president again in 2018. Mr. Trump is a foreign affairs neophyte, but he is already learning that nations can't be bullied like GOP candidates or CEOs. They have their own nationalist political dynamics, and when attacked, they push back. The pro-business sector of Mexico, I got to think, is panicked now about what the populist anger may happen, correct?
Is not only the pro-business sector, which is the one the Wall Street Journal is most worried about, of course, but also, professionals, everyday Mexicans, the man on the street, people who have families in the United States. 1 of every 4 Mexicans has family in the United States. People who work or teach in the United States, like myself, part of the year. We've worked real hard over these last few years to change this, and we don't want that leftist, anti-American sentiment to spring again. We want a strong nationalist sentiment in Mexico. Of course we do. Many people believe in Mexico that perhaps our policies, our economic and social policies, have been too conservative over the past 20 years. That may be true, but this is playing with fire. What Trump is doing is not only risking awakening this sentiment in Mexico, but awakening instability in Mexico. The U.S. should count its blessings.
Very quickly, if you were currently foreign minister and you were asked about, give me a retaliatory measure, you were asked by your president, I need a retaliatory measure, a tangible retaliatory measure against the United States to sort of send a message here, don't do this, what would you recommend?
I'd recommend 3, one after the other. The first one would be to cease communications between the existing American security, military, and drug enforcement people in Mexico and their Mexican counterparts. The Americans can stay here, but we won't take their phone calls anymore. If that doesn't work, then I'd take half of the DEA agents, I'd say probably 50 out of 100, and have them leave. And if that doesn't work, then we'll start looking at the Central American immigrant situation on Mexico's southern border, which we have been helping the U.S. on since July of 2014. Frankly, I don't see any reason why we should continue to do that. If the kids from El Salvador want to seek asylum in the U.S., let them do so.
Well, and all right, there it is. Jorge Castaneda, former foreign minister there in Mexico. Always appreciate your views. Thanks for coming on, sir. Good to see you.
Thank you, Chuck.